Ever since I was ordained in 2004, I intend to take an airplane flight tomorrow morning after the festivities of the Christmas Eve services. We still have a service tomorrow at 11, but we luckily have a retired rector who's going to come in and do the service so that the clergy can get some respite after this difficult time of stress, and also 4 services with lots going on, lots of exciting kids this afternoon. We had 150 at the 3 o'clock. We had 209 at the 5 o'clock. So I look forward tomorrow to going down to Florida, to Naples, Florida, flying into Fort Myers to see my mother, who's 80. And I've often done this the day after Christmas, and one of the things that I really try to do whenever I'm down there for the time between Christmas and New Year's is go to a place just south of downtown Fort Myers. It's the winter estate of Thomas Edison and Henry Ford. Have any of you been there? It's a really neat place. It was built in 1885, originally called the Seminole Lodge, and was built by Mr. Edison for his time to get out of the winter of New Jersey. And it's about 21 acres right on the Kahula, I never can pronounce this, as an Indian name, Cohashatchee River in Fort Myers, just south of downtown. And so during World War I, things picked up during that time, and Mr. Edison had his friend Henry Ford come and Mr. Harvey Firestone to come and look for domestic sources of rubber, because it was the time of the war and they didn't want to rely on overseas rubber plantations for their cars or their tanks or things like that. So they tested about 17,000 different species of plants in order to find a domestic source of rubber, and they were starting along the way with something called goldenrod. Now, I'm not a botanist, so I don't know much about that, but Mr. Edison, as you might remember, was one of the greatest inventors in our country, who was born in 1847 and died in the early years of the Depression in 1931. And one day in New Jersey, as a small child, he came home from school and gave a paper to his mother that the teacher had given him. And he said to her, "Mom, my teacher gave me this paper and told me that you are to read it. What does it say?" So his mom read it, and her eyes welled up with tears as she read the letter out loud to her child, and she said, "Your son is a genius. This school is too small for him, and he doesn't have good enough teachers so that he could get his training. Please educate him and teach him yourself." How many of you have heard this story? So many years later, Thomas Edison's mother eventually died, and as we know, he became one of the greatest inventors in the century. And as he was going through some of his mom's belongings, he came across this folded letter that his teacher wrote to his mother that day. And so he sat down and he opened it. And the message on the letter said, "Your son is mentally deficient. We cannot let him attend our school anymore. He is expelled." And Thomas Edison became very emotional reading that, and then he wrote in his diary just after that, he said, "Thomas Edison was a mentally deficient child whose mother turned him into the genius of a century." You see, Jesus Christ is like Mrs. Edison. Christ shields us from the ultimate defeater, a lack of hope. He protects us and takes us under his wing like Edison's mother did. Christ gives us hope in this broken world. And Mrs. Edison gave her son hope in that he was not mentally deficient, but that he was a genius who had potential. The original letter sent home was a defeating and destructive one. The created letter inspired hope. and one of the greatest inventors of our history. And life really has two letters if you think about it. One is that there is no God, no hope, no everlasting life or list. And yet the other is that God in Christ defends us and protects us like Mrs. Edison did for her son. Christ does not allow us to be expelled from the school of living or the school of life. And as we get older, we have plenty more failures as we go along, and we know that that teaches us character and humility, and we get up each day and do it all over again, each and every day. And the greater part of this story is that Jesus promises that our failures are not the final say. They're not the ultimate eternal grade on our report card of life. Light overcomes darkness, always. Good overcomes evil, always. Christ the King triumphs over all the forces in this world which seek to destroy us and give us pain or self-doubt, fear, anxiety, sadness or depression, addictions, seeking revenge on others, or harboring hatred toward others or ourselves. But there's none of that in our final report card. We're not expelled out of the school of God's loving grasp. Sometimes we might need to be retrained in our theological studies. Sometimes we stay after school to sit with the teacher in order to fully understand. Sometimes we need to remain behind to clean the erasers as a method of learning. How many of you did that besides me? Now they have whiteboards, they don't clean erasers anymore. And because God does not expel us, we listen to this new way of being. To this way that says, the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. And God does this quietly in a stable, under the stars tonight, with the newborn infant, a tired mother, and a very saintly and earthly father. See, God could have changed the world in a way that Zeus and the Greek gods would have understood, through battles of force, through edict, through mandate. But God did not do that. He came in gentleness. And that's why we are intrigued by his life and love this holiday so much. A softness, a gentleness, a pastoral manner in a pasture. And God uses us to be those instruments of his love and compassion and peace and kindness and blessed gratitude. As the German World War II Lutheran pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer writes, God chose people and chooses people as his instruments and performs his wonders where one would least expect them. God is near to the lowliness. He loves the lost, the neglected, the unseemly, the excluded, the weak, and the broken. And each of us in our own lives have felt some of those stages of being, if we're honest with ourselves. But as we experience them, know this, that God never leaves us. He stands next to us. We stand on his shoulders. And God comes to us in the form of humility on this night. He comes to us in the form of love. But it doesn't end there, my friends. Because what he does, which is sometimes the most difficult part of all, is he asks us to do the same. He asks us to do the same first with ourselves, to love ourselves just the way that we are. We put our oxygen mask on first in order to understand the absolute necessity of oxygen, and then we help our neighbor. And as we breathe deep into this night with the ultimate oxygen of God's love. May we hold on to it for just a little while. May we be transformed by this life-giving air of the deepest state of being of all, this state of love. And then we share it with our neighbors. We give this life force to our friends, to our enemies, and we make that journey to the manger not just a one-time deal, but every day of our life, to make the journey to the one who came to us in the utmost form of humility, the one who gives us that eternal compassion and love and that peace which passes all understanding, the one that gives us the joy in knowing that we are loved despite of ourselves or in spite of ourselves, and that we are okay in the eyes of God. Amen.